Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Andrew Robinson. I am a recovering audiophile, and if this is your first time to my channel, I would just like to say welcome. Welcome to the place where we talk about all things hi-fi, music, art, and design, but if you're one of my subscribers, you already knew that, so welcome back. And today we're going to break with some of the audiophile talk. Instead, we are diving into home theater. That's right, we have cooked up a very simple, easy to follow 5.1 home theater setup guide for you all. But before we get into that, earlier this week, we told you that we were launching a members only section on this channel. Well, guess what? It's live. You can go check it out by clicking the join button right down there. But enough about that. Let's dive into our 5.1 home theater setup guide. So before we go any further, I want to stress one thing. Today's video is not a review. I repeat, this is not a review. We are not going to be talking about the performance of any of the components that we are using to illustrate how to set up a home theater. But I do want to tell you what components we are using in this video so that if you are shopping yourself and looking for options out there, these are worthwhile things to consider, but we will also link to a bunch of other ones in the description below to get you started. So the speakers we are using today are from Yamo. They are the Studio Series S803 speaker system. This system is currently available on Amazon for $199, and it comes with 4 bookshelf speakers and a center channel. So it is the 5 of the 5.1 in a speaker system. It doesn't come with a subwoofer, and for that we are using a Kanto Sub 8. The Kanto Sub 8 also available on Amazon. We've talked about it briefly a little bit on this channel, and it's just something that we had in-house. The AV receiver that we are using is the Marantz NR1509. Now this is last year's model, so we're linking instead down below to the current one. Just know that there really isn't any changes between the one that we're using versus the new one if you are shopping for an AV receiver. And it should be noted that the 1509 is an entry-level receiver. I'm talking sub $500. It is a 5.2 channel receiver, and it is meant for small to medium-sized rooms. If you are looking to do a little bit more fancy home theater type setups, you're going for Atmos, things like that, this is not the receiver to do that with. But also, this isn't that video. This video is about getting you up and running quickly and easily, and that is why we are focusing on a basic 5.1 channel home theater setup. Now the TV that we will be using in this example is an LG NanoCell 90 series. It is an LED backlit TV. We're not going to be diving too much into the television. This is about setting up a home theater from the TV on down to the speakers, but it is important that you know because there are features about the LG that we will be taking advantage of, but understand that there are other televisions out there that have similar features, so it's not like you have to only look at or buy the LG. The other thing that you're going to need in order to follow along and set up your home theater properly is the appropriate lengths of speaker cables, preferably terminated with banana terminated ends. You're also going to need the requisite length and number of HDMI cables. Now the speaker cables, audio cables, and HDMI cables that you see in this video are all generic. And I want to stress this, you do not have to go broke buying very expensive cables. You can buy any off-the-shelf, non-name brand, generic cable in this regard. It will work fine, and it will work wonders for your first ever home theater system. Now before we get into the physical setup of this home theater, I think that it's important that we take just a second to define some of the terms you're going to hear in this video and probably elsewhere in your journey. For example, we will be setting up a 5.1 channel home theater. Now channel is just another word for speaker or loudspeaker. It's all the same. So a 5.1 channel home theater refers to the number of speakers found in that home theater. 5 representing the speakers themselves and the .1 representing the number of subwoofers. So anytime you hear 5.1, that's 5 speakers plus 1 subwoofer in a home theater. Pretty simple. Now there are other types of home theaters. There's 7.1, 7.2, 9.2, there's Dolby Atmos. And those are all very exciting, but that is not the video we're talking about today. We're talking about the entry point to home theater, which is 5.1. And in a 5.1 speaker system, there are 5 key speakers that you need. The first being left and right main channels or speakers. Now these can be bookshelves, they can be floor standing, they can be whatever speaker you want. You will be seeing the installation of two-way bookshelf speakers from Yamo. But they're left and right, they go on either side, the left or right side of your display. Now, the other speaker, and arguably the most important speaker in any home theater system, is the center channel. And the reason why it's so important is because movies have a lot of dialogue, and therefore the center channel gets used 90% of the time. It is arguably the most important loudspeaker in a home theater system. And the center channel goes where it sounds, right in the middle, below your screen, pointed directly at your seated listening or viewing position. Apart from the 3 speakers located up front, you are going to need a left and right surround speaker. That is to say, a speaker that is mounted to the left and to the right of your seated position so that you can hear all of the surround sound effects that are mixed into your favorite movies. Now, a few things about placement with respect to surround sound speakers. A lot of people think that surround sound speakers go behind you. In a 5.1 system, this is not true. Surround sound speakers in a 5.1 system should be mounted above and directly to the side of your primary seated position. If you can't mount them up high, that's fine. You can put them on stands, and we're going to show you both implementations in this video, but just know that in a 5.1 channel surround sound setup, the left and right surround speakers are actually meant to be installed directly to the sides of your listening position. And not to be forgotten, of course, we're talking about the subwoofer. And today we are only going to be using a single subwoofer. And I know on YouTube and on the internet, maybe you're running into things where people are telling you you need multiple subwoofers and more subwoofers are better. And that's not entirely wrong, but it's also not entirely true. The truth is you can have very, very satisfying bass from a single subwoofer, provided you set it up properly. Now, this video is not going to be about subwoofer placement or setup per se, but a while back I created not one but 2 subwoofer videos, and I will link to them in the description below, and you should go check those out to get the absolute most and best performance from whatever subwoofer you have currently in your system. But for the purposes of this video, we will just simply be placing it in our room, and I will be showing you the basic steps in connecting it to your receiver and getting the most out of it as quickly and as easily as possible. So with all that kind of basic terminology out of the way, let's dive in to installation. So once we've unboxed all of our loudspeakers, the first thing that we're going to want to do is place them in the proper positions in our room. So for this example, we have put both of the larger of the Yamo bookshelves on stands to the left and right side of our LG TV. We've obviously placed the center speaker directly below the LG and in the center atop our BDI Octave media cabinet. And if you don't have speaker stands, you can, provided your cabinet or media center console is wide enough, you can potentially put your loudspeakers, if they're bookshelf speakers, on either side of the television on the cabinet itself. And as for the surrounds, we've chosen to set them up in 2 ways just to kind of illustrate our point, but the first way is above and to the side of our seated position, and the second is atop speaker stands themselves, also to the side of our seated position. Now you might notice that I have placed the subwoofer off to the side, and depending on which way you choose to look at the room, if I'm staring at my LG, it is off to the left side of the room. And the reason I've placed it there is I have already predetermined that that is one of the places in our room where bass sounds best. And if you're wondering, well, how did you know that? Again, you can check out my 2 older videos on subwoofer placement, and I will link to them down in the description below. But that is how to place the speakers in and around your room for a proper 5.1 channel home theater setup. It's really that easy. This part is not meant to be complicated. And the next part isn't either, because connecting your speakers to your AV receiver is very, very straightforward. The first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that all of your speaker cables are the appropriate length to run from the back of the speakers themselves all the way to wherever you are choosing to house your AV receiver. Now, since we are putting our Marantz AV receiver inside our BDI cabinet, the front 3 speakers don't have very far to go in terms of length of speaker cable required. However, surround sound speakers are obviously further away, so you're going to want to make sure, maybe even before you start installing stuff, that you know the rough distance that you're going to have to run speaker cable from your surround speakers all the way to your equipment rack where your AV receiver sits. And the same thing is true for your subwoofer. You're going to want to make sure that you have a long enough RCA style cable that runs from the subwoofer to the back of the receiver itself. Now, before we get into connecting all of our loudspeakers and various components to our AV receiver, why don't we go ahead and make sure that everything is powered down, and for extra safety, go ahead and unplug everything from the wall. We want to make all of our connections with no possibility for there to be any drama electrically until we're ready to hit power and power everything up together. Now it's time to start connecting our loudspeakers to our AV receiver. We're going to start with the left and right front speakers. So we're first going to want to take one end of our speaker cable. We're going to want to take the red and black ends and plug them into the corresponding lugs on the back of the speaker themselves, red to red, black to black. Then take the other end of that speaker cable and plug it into the corresponding terminal on the back of your receiver. So left speaker gets plugged into the left speaker terminal on the back of your receiver. Do the same for the right speaker. Do the same for the center speaker as well as the right and left surround speakers. To connect our subwoofer, we're going to want to take our RCA cable and go to our subwoofer, plug it into the left or LFE out. Some subwoofers have stereo outputs. We're going to want to use the left or white output in this instance, and then running it all the way back to the sub output number 1 on our Marantz receiver. If your subwoofer only has one output, that is to say it just says sub out or LFE out, then you don't have a choice. You just go right out of that. Now, I don't want to leave the subwoofer just yet, because you may notice on the back of your subwoofer there are a number of dials and maybe even a few switches. The first dial that you're likely to see is level. That is referring to the level or volume control on the back of the subwoofer itself. Go ahead and put the volume in the 12 o'clock position, give or take. Now, the next dial you may notice on the back of your subwoofer is labeled crossover. Now, this may seem a little confusing, but think about it this way. A crossover is the point with which your receiver stops sending bass to your loudspeakers and instead crosses it over to sending it to your subwoofer. Now, you may have a myriad of settings on this dial. You may see dozens of options, you may see 4 options. It all depends on the subwoofer you have chosen to buy. In this instance, we have a variable knob in which we can kind of set it wherever we want. The other things that you may notice on the back of your subwoofer may be auto on off or phase. Go ahead and set your subwoofer to auto on. That is to say, when it gets a signal, when it senses a signal, it will turn itself on. And when it's not being used or you've gone to bed for the evening, it will shut itself off. So I do recommend that you set your subwoofer to auto on. As for phase, it's probably in the 0 position. Fancier or higher end subwoofers have a variable phase where you can kind of dial it in, but more affordable budget offerings tend to have a 2-way phase, which is either 180 degrees or 0. Go ahead and leave it in the 0 position. We will come back to that in a moment if we need to. So with our subwoofer connected to the back of our AV receiver and all of our speakers connected to the back of our AV receiver, the only thing left to do is to connect our AV receiver to our television. To do this, you're going to want to take one of your HDMI cables and plug it into the monitor or video out HDMI port on the back of your receiver. These are usually pretty clearly marked, and a lot of AV receivers only have one output and many, many inputs. Then you're going to want to run that same HDMI cable into an HDMI input on your television. Now, for this, I highly, highly, highly recommend plugging into the input on your television marked HDMI/ARC. And ARC stands for Audio Return Channel. And all that means is that any audio coming from the TV or that you otherwise would have heard through the television speakers themselves will now be routed down to your receiver and thus come out your loudspeakers. If you want to connect a Blu-ray player, CD player, DVD player, anything like that, it's pretty straightforward. If your player has an HDMI output, you're going to want to connect the HDMI out of your player into the corresponding labeled HDMI input on the back of your receiver. So for the purposes of this example, we have a Blu-ray player. We have simply connected it to the Blu-ray input on the back of our Marantz AV receiver. Once everything is connected, everything is plugged in, go ahead and plug in all the power cords to all of your various devices and power everything on. Now we're going to go through the basic on-screen menus inside your AV receiver. Now we, again, are using a Marantz NR1509. So understand that not every AV receiver has exactly the same menus laid out in exactly the same way. So your experience may differ ever so slightly than what I'm about to describe, but you should still be able to find the necessary menus in your on-screen menu and follow along. I'm going to take you through the steps manually, but I am going to point out that if you do have an automated setup system in your AV receiver, go ahead and use that because it's going to do it for you, and that's awesome. And the first thing that we're going to do is configure our speakers. And configuring our speakers is different than setting them up. We've already set them in the room, but our receiver doesn't know what we've essentially put in our living room. So we need to tell it. And that's what speaker setup or speaker configuration means. So we're going to go into that menu and we are going to tell it what type of loudspeaker we are using for our left and right front speakers. That is the two speakers on either side of the television. Now, bookshelf speakers are often referred to as small. And so in this instance, we would set our loudspeaker to small. But if you have floor standing speakers capable of producing enough bass or satisfying bass, go ahead and set them to large. Moving on to the center speaker, you may see an option for is there one, is there not one, and then what kind is it? In the case of the Marantz, you have none, small, or large. Again, our particular center channel in this example is small, so we're going to go ahead and set it to small. As for the surround speakers, we are also going to set those to small because obviously they are actually much smaller than our left and right mains. It's very rare that you walk into a home theater where the surround channels are as beefy as what you find across the front. And then of course we also want to tell our receiver that we are using a subwoofer, so we're going to want to go ahead and set the subwoofer to on. So now that we've told our receiver what speakers we have and where, we're going to go ahead and back out of that menu and move on down to distance. Now distance is exactly what it sounds like. It is the distance between you and your loudspeaker. The AV receiver needs to know just how far away each speaker is from you in order to make sure that the sound and all of the surround sound effects reach your ears at exactly the right time. So you may need a tape measure for this, and you may even need a little bit of help. You can do this by yourself, but it is a little easier with a partner. But what you're going to want to do is from your primary listening seated position, measure roughly the distance to each loudspeaker. And it's okay that the front three loudspeakers, your left, center, and right channels, may all be roughly a certain distance away, while your surround channels may seem closer. For example, in our room, our front three speakers are roughly about 12 to 13 feet away from our seated position, whereas our surround speakers are more like 8 or 9 feet away. And that's okay, just because they may have a closer distance, that is to say, they don't measure as far away. That doesn't mean that their sound is going to be closer to you. So yes, make sure that you measure the appropriate distance to each speaker from your primary seated listening position, and do this also for your subwoofer. Once you've entered all of the distances for each of your loudspeakers in your 5.1 system, go ahead and back out of that menu, and the next menu that you are likely to see is going to be labeled levels. Now, we are going to skip this part. We are, because this is a little bit more of a higher functionality that may require you to have a special tool that you probably don't presently own. But basically what levels entails is you can go in and finely tune all of your loudspeakers to ensure that they are absolutely outputting the exact same volume across all 5 speakers and your subwoofer. But to do this, you need an SPL meter. And we're going to create a video down the road about SPL meters and how to calibrate your system. But just for the basic setup and use, know that most AV receivers have the levels set to 0 across the board. Go ahead and just skip by levels for now. Now below levels, you're likely going to find the crossover submenu. And we talked about crossover briefly earlier in this video, and I told you we would be coming back to it. Here it is. Now crossover, remember, is the point with which bass is crossed over or moved from your speakers to the subwoofer. And again, you don't need to know really in terms of hertz what that means. Just know that a lot of AV receivers default to 80 hertz. And 80 hertz is fine. That's a fine crossover point, and it's kind of an industry standard. Now our bookshelf loudspeakers happen to play comfortably down to 80 hertz, so we can go ahead and leave the crossover point at 80 hertz. But if your AV receiver defaults to say 100 hertz or 120 hertz, you can leave it there, you absolutely can, or you can go in and select each individual speaker and set the crossover accordingly. Now for surround sound speakers, which tend to be on the smaller side, we may want to use a crossover point of 100 to 120 hertz. The same is true, let's say if you have things like the little tiny Jewel speakers from say Bose. Those may not play down to 80 hertz with the same authority, in which case you might want to use a 100 or 120 hertz setting. All we're doing is letting the AV receiver know that anything below 100, 120, or 80 hertz is not to be sent to our loudspeakers, but instead crossed over and routed to our subwoofer. Now our marantz receiver does have another submenu below crossover called bass settings, and we're going to go ahead and go into that because we want to make sure that the bass goes to both the subwoofer as well as to our main speakers when listening to a stereo signal. That is to say that when we use our home theaters to listen to 2-channel music, we want to make sure that our subwoofer is used because, like I said earlier in this video, stereo soundtracks don't have a dedicated subwoofer feed. So what we want to do is send the bass that was otherwise going to go to our main right and left speakers. We want to make sure that that bass is also going to our subwoofer. So you may have to set your bass settings to LFE plus main. Main in this instance is referring to our left and right main speakers. Now that we've finished with all of the speaker setup, we need to go to the video portion of our menus and select HDMI setup. And the only thing that we're really looking for here is to make sure that ARC or HDMI ARC is turned on. If it is in a default off position, go ahead and turn that on. And the reason we need this on is because we are using the audio return channel on the back of our marantz receiver as well as the input/output on the TV itself. And we want sound that we are getting through our streaming services or apps on our smart TV to be transferred from our television down to our marantz and thus out to our loudspeakers. So we just want to make sure that ARC is turned on. So with ARC now enabled inside of our AV receiver, go ahead and just back out of all of the menus, but we're not quite ready to watch a movie just yet. Go ahead and grab your TV remote, go ahead and enter into the menus of your television and select the audio submenu. Inside your TV's audio submenu, you may have options like TV speakers, optical, HDMI, ARC, things like that. We're going to want to make sure, because we are using the ARC input/output on our television, we're going to want to make sure that we set the audio to ARC as well. And this will make sure that when we stream using our smart TV apps, all of the audio from the movies that we're choosing to stream or the television programming we're choosing to watch or the YouTube channels we're choosing to watch is sent down to our receiver and thus out our loudspeakers. So with ARC turned on in both the television and our AV receiver, congratulations, you are done. You have successfully installed your very first 5.1 channel home theater system in your living room. Congratulations. Give yourself a hand, and the only thing left to decide is, what are we watching? What are you going to watch? I want to know. Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked this video or if you want to see other guides on this channel, also let me know down in the comments below. But if you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Remember, our members only section is officially launched. You can check that out by clicking join below. And follow me on Instagram, Recovering Audiophile. And that's it. I got to get out of here. So remember, the only person that has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Be well, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye. Down in the... God damn it! Down on the outside crap side. All right.
It's here.
I thought it was funny.
It's not.
We're almost done. We're so close.
It was just in my head, like hearing the...
Now you're gonna make it worse. This easy to follow, quick.
Not easy. It's not quick, that's for sure.
Okay. So close. So close. Here we go.
The only thing that was weird was the very last thing.
And that's what the last thing people remember. The only part that was weird was the thing you ended on.